Man, we have records tying this register to 3 separate fraudulent transfers. You want to explain that?
What? I don't know what you're talking about. I just run groceries and clock out. That's it.
Your ID came back flagged. We're not leaving until we figure out how you got it.
I didn't get anything. That's my license. That's my name. Y'all are
Step
making a
out from
mistake.
behind the counter.
No, why? I haven't done
Hands
anything.
where I can see him.
Federal agents Eric Matthews and James Sullivan walked into a Minnesota grocery store one busy afternoon in March 2019, pulled 30-year-old Shanice Coleman away from her register in handcuffs, and accused her of criminal activity while customers watched in horror. What they didn't know was that the store's ceiling-mounted cameras captured every aggressive word, every dismissive gesture, and every racially motivated assumption they made, evidence so damning it would cost the federal government $8.4 million and destroy their reputations forever. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. March 15, 2019, 2:47 p.m. The Super Value grocery store on Lake Street in Minneapolis was packed with afternoon shoppers. Shanice Coleman stood at Register 4, scanning items with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd worked retail for 6 years. At 30 years old, she was saving money to finish her business degree at the University of Minnesota. The beep of the scanner, the rustle of plastic bags, the small talk with regulars, this was her routine. The automatic doors slid open. 2 men in dark suits walked through, and Shanice noticed them immediately because they didn't grab shopping carts. Federal agents Eric Matthews, 42, a 15-year veteran of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and his partner James Sullivan, 38, moved through the produce section with their eyes locked on the registers. Matthews had a reputation in his department for what his supervisors called aggressive tactics. Sullivan had 3 formal complaints in his file for excessive force during detentions. They walked directly toward Register 4. Shanice was mid-transaction with an elderly woman buying groceries when Matthews approached her register. Shanice Coleman? His hand was already moving toward his badge. She looked up, confused, her fingers still on the scanner. Yes? The elderly customer stepped back, sensing something wrong. Federal agents, we need you to step away from the register, now. Sullivan moved to her right side, blocking any path away from the counter. Shanice's heart hammered in her chest. I'm sorry, what is this about? She looked toward her manager, Dan Peterson, who was stocking shelves 20 feet away and hadn't noticed yet. Matthews didn't even look at him. Federal business, step back. The dismissiveness in his tone was captured on camera 5, the one mounted near the customer service desk. Peterson pulled out his phone and called the store owner, while Matthews and Sullivan walked Shanice to the back of the store, past the dairy section where camera 9 recorded the entire walk, past frozen foods where camera 12 caught Sullivan gripping her arm tighter than necessary. They took her to the store's break room. For 47 minutes, they interrogated her about bank accounts she didn't have, transactions she never made, and people she'd never met. Matthews did most of the talking, his questions aggressive and accusatory. Sullivan stood by the door, arms crossed. Shanice asked repeatedly what evidence they had. They showed her nothing. Camera 14, positioned in the hallway outside the break room, recorded them walking her back out at 3:34 p.m. No arrest, no charges. They simply removed the handcuffs and told her she was free to go, as if the previous 47 minutes hadn't happened, as if they hadn't just humiliated her in front of her workplace, her customers, her community. Matthews and Sullivan left through the same automatic doors they'd entered. Shanice stood near the registers, shaking, while coworkers surrounded her with questions she couldn't answer. Dan Peterson had already saved the CCTV footage to the store's server. That afternoon's video files, time-stamped and archived, would become the most important evidence in a case that would take 5 years to reach a courtroom and end with an $8.4 million verdict that neither Matthews nor Sullivan saw coming. Shanice didn't return to work the next day. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw customers staring at her in handcuffs, heard the metal clicking around her wrists, felt the weight of being accused of crimes she knew nothing about. Her hands shook when she tried to hold her coffee mug that morning. At 30 years old, she'd never been arrested, never been in trouble with law enforcement, never even gotten a speeding ticket. Her mother, Patricia Coleman, drove over within an hour of hearing what happened. She found Shanice sitting on her apartment couch, still wearing yesterday's work uniform. "Baby, we need to call someone, a lawyer. This isn't right." But Shanice felt paralyzed by shame she shouldn't have carried. What would people think? What if her co-workers believed she actually did something wrong? By day 3, the grocery store's corporate office had gotten involved. The owner, Michael Chen, reviewed the CCTV footage himself and immediately contacted his attorney. What he saw disturbed him. Federal agents detaining his employee without showing a warrant, without probable cause visible on any camera angle, without anything that justified the public humiliation they'd inflicted. Chen called Shanice personally. "I've saved all the footage, 16 different angles. If you decide to fight this, we'll provide everything." That phone call changed something in her. She reached out to the Minnesota chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, and they connected her with attorney Rebecca Morrison from the civil rights firm Morrison and Associates. Rebecca, 45, had spent 2 decades handling cases of police misconduct and federal overreach. When Shanice walked into her office on March 22nd, 1 week after the detention, she brought a flash drive containing the complete CCTV footage. Rebecca watched all 16 camera angles in silence. She paused repeatedly on Matthews's aggressive approach, on the moment handcuffs appeared before any explanation was given, on Sullivan's unnecessary grip during the walk through the store, on Shanice's visible confusion and fear. "This is textbook racial profiling," Rebecca said finally. "They had no warrant, no evidence, and the footage shows they treated you as guilty from the moment they entered that store. Can we prove that's why they targeted me?" Shanice's voice was quiet. She'd spent the week wondering if she was overreacting, if maybe there was some legitimate reason she couldn't understand. Rebecca pulled up Matthews's personnel file, obtained through discovery requests. 3 previous complaints of racial bias during detentions, 2 settled quietly by ICE before reaching court. Sullivan's record showed a pattern too, excessive force complaints, all involving people of color. "They have history. You have video evidence. We can absolutely prove this." Filing the lawsuit took months of preparation. Rebecca brought in her partner, David Kim, a specialist in federal litigation. They documented everything: Shanice's spotless record, her employment history, character witnesses from supervisors and co-workers. Medical records showed she'd started therapy for anxiety and PTSD symptoms directly linked to the detention. She couldn't walk past uniformed officers without her pulse racing. Grocery shopping at other stores triggered panic attacks. The lawsuit, filed in federal district court on August 3, 2019, named Matthews and Sullivan individually, along with ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. The charges: unlawful detention, violation of Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure, racial profiling, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of civil rights under Federal Statute 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. The defendant's initial response came through the U.S. Attorney's Office. They claimed Matthews and Sullivan had received an anonymous tip about fraudulent activity at that grocery store location and were following standard protocol. They insisted the detention was brief, professional, and legally justified. Rebecca filed the CCTV footage as evidence within days. 47 minutes wasn't brief. The aggressive approach without identifying themselves first wasn't professional, and nothing in the video supported their claim of following protocol. The government's attorneys went quiet for weeks after viewing those 16 camera angles, clearly recognizing the problem they faced. This wasn't a case where details were murky or disputed. Everything was on camera, time-stamped, undeniable. The path to trial was set, and Shanice Coleman's fight for justice had officially begun. The trial began on January 12, 2024, nearly 5 years after that afternoon detention. Courtroom 6A in the Federal District Court was packed with journalists, civil rights advocates, and community members who'd followed Shanice's case through every delay and motion. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a no-nonsense jurist with 20 years on the bench, presided over the proceedings. Shanice sat at the plaintiff's table between Rebecca Morrison and David Kim, wearing a navy blue suit, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The prosecution's opening statement was direct. Rebecca stood before the jury, 8 women and 4 men of varying ages and backgrounds, and laid out exactly what they'd see. The evidence in this case isn't complicated. You're going to watch video footage of federal agents racially profiling and illegally detaining an innocent woman. You'll see it from 16 different angles. You'll hear it time-stamped down to the second, and you'll understand that what happened to Shanice Coleman was wrong, unlawful, and deserving of accountability. The defense attorney, Gerald Austin from the Department of Justice, tried a different approach. He painted Matthews and Sullivan as dedicated public servants responding to credible intelligence about criminal activity. These agents were doing their jobs, following leads, protecting our communities from fraud and identity theft. Sometimes investigations don't result in arrests. That doesn't make them illegal. Then the footage played. The courtroom went silent as monitor screens showed camera 2's angle, Matthews and Sullivan entering the store, walking past shoppers, heading straight for Register 4 where Shanice worked. No stopping to ask questions, no speaking with management first, direct approach to one specific cashier. The timestamp read 2:47:23 p.m. Rebecca paused the video. Notice they don't speak to any other employees. They don't check multiple registers. They walk directly to Ms. Coleman. She resumed playback. The audio was clear enough to hear Matthews demand Shanice step away from her register. Hear the confusion in her voice. Hear the click of handcuffs. 3 jurors visibly winced. Camera 5 showed the walk through the store from a different perspective. Sullivan's hand gripped Shanice's upper arm, fingers digging in harder than necessary for someone compliant and cooperative. Camera 12 caught her face as they passed frozen foods, humiliation and fear equally visible in her expression. Shanice took the stand on day 3. Rebecca guided her through that afternoon step by step. What went through your mind when they put handcuffs on you? I thought I was going to jail. I didn't know what I'd done, but I thought my life was over right there. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I kept asking what this was about. They wouldn't tell me. They just kept accusing me of things I'd never heard of. How did it feel being detained in front of your customers and co-workers? Like everyone was looking at me like I was a criminal, like everything I'd worked for didn't matter because in that moment I was just someone in handcuffs. The defense's cross-examination tried to suggest Shanice fit a description from their anonymous tip. Austin asked about her height, weight, hair color. Rebecca immediately objected. The defense hasn't produced any written tip, any description, any documentation that this anonymous source even existed. Judge Hendricks sustained the objection. Mr. Austin, if you have documentation of this tip, present it, otherwise move on. He couldn't. There was no tip, no documentation, no evidence that Shanice matched any legitimate investigation. Expert witness Dr. James Richardson, a former FBI instructor who specialized in proper detention procedures, testified on day 5. He'd reviewed all 16 camera angles multiple times. Nothing in this footage shows adherence to standard protocol. Agents are required to identify themselves clearly, state the reason for detention, and use minimum necessary force. These agents failed on all 3 counts. Matthews and Sullivan both testified, each insisting they'd followed proper procedure, but when Rebecca played specific footage clips showing their contradictory statements, their credibility crumbled. Matthews claimed he'd explained the reason for detention immediately. Camera 2's audio proved he hadn't. Sullivan insisted the detention lasted approximately 15 minutes. The timestamp showed 47. After 6 days of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict. The foreman stood, paper in hand, and Judge Hendricks asked for the decision. Shanice held her breath, Rebecca's hand squeezing hers under the table, as Justice finally prepared to speak. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Shanice Coleman, on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Shanice's breath caught in her chest as tears streamed down her face. Rebecca Morrison grabbed her hand while David Kim smiled for the first time in days. Behind them, Patricia Coleman sobbed openly, her daughter finally vindicated after 5 years of fighting. Judge Hendricks gavelled for order, but even she couldn't hide a slight nod of satisfaction. The jury foreman continued reading. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $2.4 million for emotional distress, loss of income, and ongoing psychological harm. Shanice had lost her job 3 months after the incident, not officially because of the incident, but the timing wasn't coincidental. She'd struggled to find work afterward, her confidence shattered, her trust in authority destroyed. Therapy sessions twice a week for 5 years added up financially and emotionally. We further award punitive damages in the amount of $6 million against defendants Eric Matthews and James Sullivan, to be paid jointly and severally with the federal government for willful violation of civil rights and reckless disregard for constitutional protections. Total, $8.4 million. Matthews sat stone-faced at the defense table, but his career was finished. Sullivan stared at his hands, knowing the same truth. Federal agents who cost the government $8.4 million don't continue serving. Within 3 months, both men would resign under pressure, their names permanently attached to one of the largest civil rights settlements in Minnesota history. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Shanice and her legal team. She stood at the microphone, no longer the terrified woman in handcuffs from those CCTV cameras. This was never just about money, she said, her voice strong and clear. This was about accountability. It was about making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else who might not have 16 cameras recording every second. Rebecca Morrison addressed the broader implications. This verdict sends a clear message to federal law enforcement. Racial profiling has consequences. You cannot target someone based on the color of their skin, humiliate them publicly, and walk away without accountability. The jury saw the evidence. They saw 2 agents who made assumptions based on race and nothing else. The Department of Homeland Security released a statement within 24 hours, announcing a comprehensive review of detention procedures and mandatory bias training for all ICE agents. Whether genuine reform or damage control, Shanice's case had forced institutional change. The $8.4 million transformed her life practically, but the verdict itself healed something deeper. She enrolled back at the University of Minnesota that fall, completing her business degree at 35 years old. She started a nonprofit organization called Clear Evidence, dedicated to helping victims of law enforcement misconduct obtain and preserve video evidence for their cases. If I hadn't had those cameras, it would have been my word against 2 federal agents, she told a community gathering in 2025. Most people don't have that advantage. Matthews and Sullivan faced additional consequences beyond resignation. The Department of Justice opened internal investigations into their previous cases, reviewing every detention they'd conducted over their careers. 3 other individuals came forward with similar stories of racial profiling, each case now being examined with fresh scrutiny. The ripple effects of that March afternoon continued spreading. Shanice still thinks about that day sometimes, the fear, the shame, the feeling of powerlessness. But she also thinks about the jury who believed her, the attorney who fought for her, the store owner who preserved the footage, and the community that supported her through 5 years of legal battle. She thinks about the $8.4 million verdict that declared to the world what happened to her was wrong, provably wrong, and justice still matters. On March 15th each year, she visits the SuperValue on Lake Street, now under new ownership but still operating. She stands near Register 4 and remembers the woman she was at 30 and recognizes the woman she's become at 35, stronger, vindicated, and living proof that fighting back against injustice, even when the odds seem impossible, can lead to victory. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's just justice preparing to hit harder than anyone expected.